Story 1. The thing that knocks when I sleep on my back. So, I guess this is where I tell the internet that I've completely lost it. Or at least that's what my sister thinks. She said I should post this here. No sleep, right? That's the one for weird stuff? Because apparently I sound like one of those creepy story people. I wish it was just a story. It started about 6 months ago, after I moved into a basement apartment on the edge of town. It was cheap, half-finished, and smelled like damp carpet, but it was mine. The landlord said no one had lived there for a while because the last guy left in a hurry. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The walls were painted this ugly yellow that somehow managed to absorb light, and the only window was a tiny rectangle near the ceiling that showed nothing but grass and the occasional tire when someone parked too close. But it was quiet, or it used to be. The knocking started the second week, always at night, always when I was trying to fall asleep. It wasn't loud, just this slow, rhythmic knock, knock, knock coming from the wall behind my bed. The first time it happened, I thought it was pipes or maybe some kind of animal, but the pattern was too deliberate. It would tap 3 times, pause for a few seconds, and then do it again. Knock, knock, knock. I tried ignoring it. I even turned my bed around so the headboard wasn't touching the wall anymore. Didn't matter. The sound followed. I started hearing it from the floor, from the ceiling, sometimes even from the closet. The worst part? It only ever happened when I was lying on my back. If I rolled onto my side, it would stop instantly. But the second I turned back, knock, knock, knock. Like something was right under me, waiting for the chance. I told myself it was anxiety, maybe some half-asleep hallucination thing. But then it started happening earlier and earlier. At midnight, at 11, once even in broad daylight when I was napping after work. That day, I decided to record it. I set my phone on the nightstand and lay down, back flat, staring at the ceiling. I waited and waited. The air in the room went still, the kind of still where even your breath feels too loud. Then, knock, knock, knock. I nearly dropped the phone, but it was there, clear as anything. I watched the waveform bounce. I even clapped once to make sure it wasn't the building settling. Different sound entirely. I replayed the clip about 100 times. And right before the second set of knocks, I could swear I heard something else. A whisper, faint, like it came from under the floor. I boosted the volume, filtered the static, and there it was, just 3 words. Not yet. Breathe. That was the first night I slept with the lights on. After that, it got worse. The knocking grew louder, sharper, like whoever, or whatever, was doing it, was losing patience. And it started syncing with my breathing. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. Every time I exhaled, knock. Every inhale, silence. Like it was waiting for me to empty my lungs. I stopped sleeping on my back altogether. I'd wedge pillows behind me, anything to keep myself tilted. It worked for a while, until the night I woke up flat, staring at the ceiling, paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The air was heavy, humid. The room smelled like wet metal and old dirt. I felt something press against the underside of the mattress. Not like a hand, but like an entire body rolling upward, pushing between me and the floor. Then the knocking started again, but from inside the mattress this time. Knock, knock, knock. It was so close I could feel it in my ribs. And over the knocking, something whispered. It wasn't in English. It wasn't even a language. More like breathing shaped into words, a hiss that slid right into my ear. And though I couldn't understand it, I felt what it meant. It wasn't threatening. It was patient, curious, like it was studying me. When I could finally move again, I threw the sheets off and dragged the mattress off the bed frame. Nothing there, just cold concrete and a faint dark stain I hadn't noticed before. I tried scrubbing it, but it never faded. I stopped sleeping in the bed after that. I moved to the couch, then eventually the floor of the living room with a sleeping bag. And for a while, The knocking didn't follow. I actually thought it might be over. Then one night, I woke up on my back again. No idea how. I could have sworn I fell asleep on my side. The air was still. The lights flickered once, and from the opposite wall, the one facing me, came a slow, deliberate knock. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. And then a new sound joined it. It was the soft creak of the floorboards under something crawling. Not walking, crawling. From the direction of my old bedroom, across the hall, through the kitchen. I didn't move. I barely breathed. It was dragging something. Heavy, slow, wet. It stopped right outside the living room. I watched the gap under the door. I swear to you, I saw fingers. Long, too long. Slide through and curl against the floor like they were testing the texture. Then, gently, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child, the voice whispered again, "On your back." That's when I ran. I moved out that same week. Didn't even tell the landlord why. The new place is bright, noisy, full of people upstairs. I sleep with my headphones in and a lamp on full blast. I never sleep on my back. Ever. But sometimes, when I'm too tired and forget myself, I'll wake up that way, and I'll feel this faint vibration through the floorboards. Not quite a knock, just a reminder. And every time it happens, I whisper back without opening my eyes. Not yet. Breathe. Hey friends, glad you're here. Settle in, breathe a little slower, and let the hum of the room do most of the work. I've got a few stories tonight, and each one is meant to feel like a quiet walk down a hallway that gets a little darker with every step. Nothing loud, nothing sudden, just the kind of strange that drifts in like mist and takes its time. If you're listening while you do other things or letting this be the soft background to sleep, I'll keep the pace unhurried and the edges rounded. We'll start with a confession I've never told out loud, because some houses hold their breath when you speak about them, and mine still does. When this ends, I'll walk you gently to the next one. For now, lean back. I'm going to tell you why I started taping my doors, and why my floor plan no longer matches what I live inside. Story 2. Something in the walls keeps trying to remember my name. I think the house knows me now. I don't mean in that sentimental way people talk about home. I mean the drywall remembers the shape of my breath, and the air rearranges itself when I enter a room. I moved in because the rent was cheap, and because no one else would. The listing had been up for months, the kind of too good to be true deal that makes you suspicious of everything. 3 bedrooms, detached garage, big yard, all for less than what I used to pay for a 1-bedroom downtown. The real estate agent kept glancing over my shoulder while I signed, like she expected someone to walk in and stop me. When I asked why the place was vacant so long, she said, "Maintenance issues," in a way that sounded memorized. The first night I slept there, the walls popped and groaned like any old house would, but around 2 in the morning, I woke to something softer. 3 taps from inside the wall behind my bed, faint but deliberate like fingertips on drywall. I froze, half asleep, half ashamed of how fast my heart was pounding. I told myself it was pipes or temperature shift. I didn't sleep again until sunrise, but I convinced myself it was nothing. The next night, it happened again. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. Same pattern, same wall. I got up, pressed my ear against the spot, and heard something underneath the rhythm. Breathing. Slow, shallow, like someone on the other side was waiting for me to answer. I laughed out loud because the alternative was panic. I said, "Hello?" And the breathing stopped. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next week, the noises spread. It wasn't just the wall behind my bed anymore. It was the hallway, the ceiling above the kitchen, the inside of the coat closet. Sometimes I'd come home from work and find things moved just slightly. A chair angled wrong, a picture frame crooked, a drawer half open. Once I found a damp handprint on the bathroom mirror. Not greasy, not smudged, but wet, like someone had leaned close right before I walked in. I tried ignoring it all, but the knocking got bolder. It started to sound like someone trying to speak through the structure. 3 knocks, pause. 1, pause. 2, pause. Like it was learning to communicate. I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with music playing. But even through the music, I'd catch those soft, patient taps between songs, and my brain began filling in syllables. My name, whispered without vowels, more like breath than word. One night, I had enough. I decided to find the source. I tore a hole in the drywall behind the bed where the knocking always came from. I expected dust, insulation, maybe a mouse nest, but the cavity was clean, empty, except for a small scrap of paper wedged between 2 studs, yellowed and soft. On it was a name, my name. Written in shaky pencil, the letters pressed so hard they nearly tore through. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. I don't remember putting it down, but I remember waking on the floor hours later with plaster dust in my hair and a taste in my mouth like old coins. The hole in the wall was sealed again, smooth as if it had never been cut. The paper was gone. I started leaving my phone recording overnight, desperate to catch proof. The first few nights, nothing but static. Then, on the 5th night, I woke to the sound of my own voice playing from the speaker. I hadn't said anything, but there I was, whispering something low, rhythmic, a word I couldn't make out, followed by a single knock. I listened over and over until I realized what I was saying. It was the same 3 words, repeated in a monotone murmur. I'm still here. I started to dread sundown. Around midnight, the walls would begin shifting, not visibly, but I could feel it, like the house was stretching, testing its own shape. The air pressure would change. The sound of my breathing would echo back at me a half-second late, like a delay on a bad phone line. Then the knocking would start, faster now, coming from multiple places at once, walls answering each other in a slow, looping language. Sometimes I'd hear whispers layered under the knocks, different voices, male and female, some laughing quietly, some weeping. I started writing down the timing of every sound, thinking maybe I could decode it, but the pattern never repeated. Every night was a new conversation I couldn't understand. Then came the night I woke up standing. I don't remember getting out of bed, but I found myself in the hallway, facing the wall at the end, my palm pressed against the plaster. The wall was warm, like a person's back. I could feel something on the other side, pressing back with equal force, hand to hand through a few inches of space. It pulsed once, twice, and I swear I felt fingers wrap around mine from inside the wall. I yanked away and fell backward, hit the floor hard, and stayed there listening. The house was quiet. My heartbeat wasn't. When I looked again, there were 5 small indents in the paint, spaced like fingertips. I covered them with duct tape. Didn't matter. The next morning, the tape was gone. Sleep became impossible. My eyes started playing tricks on me, shadows that held their shape too long, reflections that lagged a second behind. I'd catch myself humming the rhythm of the knocks without realizing it. My co-workers asked if I was okay. I lied. One night, desperate, I set up a camera in the living room and aimed it at the biggest section of wall. I hit record, left the lights off, and went upstairs. Around 3, the familiar pattern woke me. I ran down half-crazed, tripped over a chair, and checked the footage. It was still recording. For 6 minutes, nothing happened. Then the paint in the middle of the wall began to bulge. Slow, like something pushing outward from the inside, stretching the plaster until it cracked. Then a hand pressed through, pale, long-fingered, skin thin as tissue, and it stayed there, feeling the air, before curling back and vanishing. The bulge flattened. The wall looked untouched again. But the camera kept rolling, and after the hand disappeared, I heard something that froze me. My voice, from behind the camera, whispering, "Don't leave yet." That was 2 weeks ago. I moved out the next morning. I told myself it was over, that it was tied to the house. But last night, as I lay in my new apartment trying to forget, I heard 3 soft knocks from the radiator. Not pipes, not settling, just the exact rhythm I've memorized by heart. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up, waited, whispered my own name to the dark like a question. The air in the room thickened, almost buzzing. Then, from the opposite wall, the knocks came back. 3 again, then 1, then 2, like a reply. My phone, face down on the nightstand, vibrated once. No notification, just that tiny tremor, perfectly in sync with the rhythm. I picked it up, and the screen was black except for a faint grey outline, an image of a wall, mine, with something moving beneath the surface. I dropped it, but the vibration didn't stop. It spread through the floorboards, the bed frame, my chest. I could feel it like a second heartbeat, matching my own. It hasn't stopped since. Story 3. The tenant upstairs who wasn't supposed to be there. I've lived in this building for almost 3 years now, and for the most part, it's been fine. Cheap rent, decent neighbors, nothing to complain about except the usual city stuff like thin walls and pipes that sound like they're clearing their throat. The place itself is this old converted boarding house from the 1940s, the kind of structure that probably shouldn't still be standing, but somehow refuses to give up. I'm on the 2nd floor out of 3, right in the middle. When I first moved in, the landlord told me the top floor was storage, something about fire codes, unstable beams, whatever. The staircase that leads up there is blocked by a heavy padlocked gate at the end of the hall, dusty and unused. I believed her, never questioned it, until 6 months ago when I started hearing someone walking up there. At first, I figured it was just the building settling, but it was too rhythmic. 2 steps, pause, 2 more. The pacing was deliberate, like someone checking the same route over and over. It always started around 2 a.m., always stopped when I got out of bed. I asked my downstairs neighbor, Evelyn, if she'd heard anything. She said no, but then she lowered her voice and told me there used to be a tenant up there years ago, before the city shut the floor down. Some old man named Garrison, who'd lived there so long, he became part of the furniture. He died in his sleep, she said, like it was an afterthought, and no one found him for a week. She said this while stirring her tea and not looking at me. And when I asked if she was serious, she just said, "The landlord doesn't like when people talk about it," and went back inside. After that conversation, I started paying attention. The footsteps came every few nights, sometimes faint, sometimes heavy. Once, during a thunderstorm, I thought I heard dragging, like furniture being pulled across the floorboards directly above my bedroom. When I told the landlord, she laughed and said, "No one's up there. You're probably hearing echoes from another unit." But the sound wasn't muffled, it was right above me. I even climbed onto a chair one night and pressed my ear to the ceiling. What I heard wasn't walking anymore. It was humming. Low, tuneless, old man humming, the kind you do when you're trying to remember how a song goes but can't quite find it. I climbed down and tried to convince myself it was a trick of plumbing or air vents, but deep down, I knew better. I started leaving my phone recording overnight just to prove to myself it was nothing. The next morning, when I listened, I heard the creak of floorboards and that same humming again, closer this time. Then, a voice. Rough, dry, like sandpaper sliding over wood. Cold tonight. Just that. Then silence. I should have moved out right then. I didn't. Rent is rent, and I didn't want to be the kind of person who runs because of a noise. I told myself maybe a squatter had somehow gotten in and was living up there secretly. That seemed saner than the alternative. So I decided to check. The gate at the end of the hallway had a thick padlock, but the screws in the hinge were old. I brought a screwdriver one night, waited until the building went quiet, and removed them. The metal shrieked softly, but no one came out to yell. The gate swung inward. The stairs beyond were covered in dust, except for a narrow line of footprints going up. I followed them, flashlight shaking in my hand, trying not to breathe too loud. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell changed. Less dust, more something like stale linen and rust. At the top of the stairs was a landing and a door. The knob was loose, but still turned. When I opened it, the flashlight beam cut through a room frozen in time. A bed frame, mattress collapsed in the middle, sheets yellowed to parchment. A small table with a lamp that looked older than the building itself. Cobwebs like curtains. I stepped inside, careful, and the door clicked shut behind me. The sound was louder than it should have been. The whole space felt smaller than it looked from below, like the angles didn't line up right. I tried the light switch, nothing. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the far wall and froze. Someone had written on the wallpaper in pencil, hundreds of little marks in neat vertical lines. Each line had a date. The most recent one was 5 years ago, next to the word awake. The one before it said cold. The one before that, still here. The writing was faint but steady, as if whoever made it had done so every day for decades. I reached out and touched the wall. The pencil smudged under my finger. Still soft. That's when the humming started again. Not from behind me, around me. It filled the room like breath-fogging glass. I turned in a circle, flashlight jerking over walls that suddenly seemed too close, like they'd leaned in. The air rippled, and for half a second, I saw movement in the corner. A shape hunched low, pale face turned toward me, mouth moving without sound. Then the flashlight flickered and went out. I don't remember leaving. One moment I was in the dark. The next I was back on the stairs, gasping, the screwdriver still in my hand. The gate was closed again. No sound, no footsteps, nothing. The next day, I told myself I'd dreamed it. I even laughed about it at work, calling it a stress nightmare. But that night, I noticed something new. A soft, dragging sound above me again. And this time, right after it stopped, the faintest whisper through the ceiling boards. My name. Not yelled, not whispered like in horror movies, just spoken, like a man testing how it feels in his mouth. Then 3 knocks, slow and patient. It's been weeks now. I can't get the landlord to come back for a maintenance check. She says the upper floor is sealed again, says she changed the lock herself. I didn't tell her I saw fresh footprints in the dust when I went back to look. I didn't tell her that last night I woke to find pencil marks on my own bedroom wall, 3 small vertical lines right at eye level when I sit up in bed. I rubbed them off, but they came back by morning, darker this time. And every night, right around 2, the humming starts again, lower and slower now, like it's remembering how to breathe. I moved my bed to the opposite corner of the room. Doesn't help. The sound follows wherever I sleep. Sometimes, I think I hear movement in the stairwell itself, someone pacing, testing the boards. The other tenants must hear it too, but no one mentions it. The mail still shows 1 empty unit upstairs, number 302. The buzzer for that apartment is broken, but every now and then, when I come home, I see the little red light beside it flickering as if someone's trying to buzz themselves in. I never press it. I don't want to know if anyone answers. Last week, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No name, no return address. Inside was a scrap of wallpaper that matched the upstairs room perfectly. Same faded floral print, same texture. And written across it in neat pencil strokes were 3 words. Still upstairs. Cold. I don't go into the hallway after dark anymore. I keep the TV on until sunrise just to drown out the noise. But no matter how loud it gets, there's always that faint hum, right above my head, keeping time with my heartbeat, waiting for me to mark another day on the wall. Story 4. The house that gave out the last candy. I've never told anyone this before, mostly because it sounds like the kind of thing a kid would make up to scare themselves. But every Halloween since I was 8 years old, I get this ache in my stomach when the sun goes down and the porch lights start to flicker on. It's like a reminder that there's one street in my hometown I still can't drive past. Not even as an adult, not even during the day. Back then, trick-or-treating was the biggest event of the year for me and my 2 friends, Tyler and Ben. We planned it like a military operation. mapped out routes, compared candy haul predictions, and argued over which houses gave out full-size bars. The year this happened, our town was colder than usual, and by the time we got halfway down Oak Ridge Lane, our breath was showing. I remember my mom saying to be home by 9, but of course we were behind schedule because Tyler insisted on hitting the old end, a section of the neighborhood most kids skipped because it backed up to the woods. The houses there were spread out and dark, no decorations, no music, no porch lights, except for one. It was the last house on the curve, big and sunken a little into the trees, with one single yellow light on above the door. It looked lonely, but also inviting in a weird way, like the kind of place that's just happy to have visitors. We almost skipped it, but then the door opened before we even knocked. There was a woman standing there, grey sweater, long hair, smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked normal enough, maybe someone's grandmother, but her face was strange in the way old photos are strange. Just a little too still, like the muscles had forgotten how to move naturally. She said, "You three are the last ones," in this warm, sing-song voice. And for some reason, that felt important, like she'd been waiting for that to be true. She held out a bowl of candy wrapped in shiny silver foil, not the usual orange Halloween stuff. I took one, Tyler took two, because he was always like that, and Ben hesitated until she said, "Go on, it's special." The candy didn't have a label, just smooth silver paper and a little string tied around the top like an old-fashioned caramel. We said thanks and started to leave, but she stopped us. She leaned out just far enough that the porch light hit her face and said, "Don't eat it until you get home." Promise? We promised, because what else do you say to an adult handing you candy? Then she shut the door quietly, and the light above it went out. I don't remember the walk back, except that the woods on either side of the road felt like they were leaning in closer than before, and the air smelled wrong, like wet iron and matches. Tyler joked that the lady was probably a witch, and Ben laughed, but it came out high-pitched and fake. When we finally got back to my house, my mom was waiting on the porch, shivering in her coat, and she looked angry. She said it was almost 10, not 9, and asked where we'd been. When we told her, her expression changed instantly. She didn't yell anymore, just went pale and told us to come inside right now. I remember her looking at the silver candy in my hand and saying, "Where did you get that?" And when I pointed down toward Oak Ridge, she shook her head like she'd stepped on a snake. She made us dump all our candy bags out on the kitchen table and started checking every wrapper like she expected to find a razor blade. But the silver candies were gone. All of them. None in the bags. None in our pockets. Just gone. We tried to laugh it off, but when I went to bed later that night, I swear I could still smell that matchstick scent on my hands. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to someone knocking on the front door. 3 slow knocks, polite but insistent. I heard my mom's footsteps in the hallway and her whispering something sharp under her breath. She opened my door just enough to tell me to stay in bed, then went downstairs. I listened, trying not to breathe. The knocking came again, softer this time, and then stopped. A minute later, I heard the front door open, just a crack, then close again. My mum came back upstairs, her face pale, her hands shaking. She said nothing except, "Go back to sleep." The next morning, there was a single silver candy on the kitchen counter. We never talked about it, not once. The next year, when Halloween came around, my mom told me I was too old for trick-or-treating. I didn't argue. A few years later, when I was in high school, I tried walking down Oak Ridge again, just to see if the house was even still there. But there was nothing past the curve anymore. Just trees and a rotted sign half buried in the ground. No mailbox, no driveway, no house. Tyler moved away that same year, and Ben stopped hanging out with us altogether. A decade later, I ran into Ben at a grocery store back home, and the first thing he said wasn't hello. It was, "Do you still think about the candy?" I lied and said no, and he nodded like he didn't believe me. That was almost 15 years ago. Tonight, I came home from work and found something on my doormat. A small piece of foil, shiny silver, tied at the top with a bit of string. I didn't touch it. It's still there, right where whoever left it set it down. I keep looking at the clock, waiting for 9, then 10, then whatever comes after that, and I can smell it again, faint but familiar. The air outside sweet and sharp, like burnt matches and metal, like someone just blew out a candle and whispered, "You three were the last ones." Story 5. The man who waited outside our window. When I was 11, my family lived in a house that backed up to an overgrown field and a small stretch of woods that people mostly forgot about. The kind of no man's land between neighbourhoods, too small for hiking, too wild for development, just this stretch of thorny trees and tall grass where wind moved like water. We'd only been there a few months when I started noticing the man who waited outside our window. I don't think that's what he was at first, just a shape, a suggestion of someone standing too still near the tree line. But once you've seen something stand that way, you can't unsee it. The first time, it was late September, still warm enough that my window stayed open at night. I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching softly outside. Not the fast, careless sound of a raccoon or cat, but the steady, deliberate weight of footsteps. I thought it was my dad checking the sprinkler timer, so I peeked through the blinds, and there he was. A man, motionless, facing the house from the edge of the field. He wasn't close, maybe 30 yards away, but he was standing in that half shadow where the yard light didn't quite reach. His head was tilted, like he was looking just past my window instead of directly at it. I ducked back, heart hammering, and listened. Nothing. No movement, no retreat, just silence thick enough that I could hear my own breathing. I told my parents the next morning, and they said it was probably a neighbour or someone walking their dog. But we didn't have neighbours in that direction, and no one walked dogs through a tangle of briars and mud. A week later, he came closer. I woke again around the same time, 2:30 or so, and this time the sound was louder, crunching right along the fence line. I stayed still, pretending to be asleep, and I could feel that he'd stopped right outside. The air through the window went colder, and the crickets cut off mid-chirp like they were holding their breath. I waited for the sound of retreating footsteps, but instead came a soft, rhythmic tapping on the glass. Not hard enough to break it, just gentle taps, like a knuckle testing how much the window would tolerate. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. I didn't look. I couldn't. I pulled the blanket over my head and lay there until the sky started to lighten. When I finally looked, there was nothing there. No footprints in the dirt, no marks on the glass. My dad laughed it off again, said maybe it was branches swaying. But the nearest tree was 20 feet away, and I knew what I'd heard. By October, I stopped sleeping altogether. Every few nights, the tapping would return. Always the same rhythm, always near the same hour. I started noticing other things too. Scratches on the siding beneath my window, faint but deliberate, like something had been tracing its fingers there. Once, I found a single coin pressed into the dirt below the window, perfectly upright, edge buried, like someone had set it there carefully. My mom thought I did it. I didn't. I started keeping my light on at night. That worked for a while. Then one night, I woke up to find it already off, and before I could move to switch it back on, the tapping started again. Only this time, it came from the inside. It was the softest sound, but so close it froze me where I lay. A tap, pause, another tap, then silence so deep it rang in my ears. I reached for the lamp, hands shaking, and when the light came on, there was nothing on the glass, nothing on the wall, but the air smelled like rain and old metal. The next morning, I told my mom I wanted to switch rooms. She didn't argue. We moved my bed to the other side of the house, facing the street instead of the field. For a week, everything was quiet. Then one night, I woke up to see the beam of a flashlight flickering through my blinds. Someone was out front, scanning across the windows. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek. A figure stood in the middle of the street, the same height and build as before, holding a flashlight low to the ground, like they were looking for something they'd dropped. But the light never touched the pavement. It stayed angled toward me, hitting the side of my house. Then, as if sensing I was watching, the man lifted the flashlight until the beam landed directly on my window. I couldn't see his face, just the outline of his shoulders and a glimpse of something shiny near his wrist. I backed away, too scared to blink, and the light shut off. No footsteps, no retreat, just darkness and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. After that, my parents installed motion lights, checked the locks twice a night. My dad even called the sheriff once, who drove by and said he'd patrol the area. It didn't matter. The man never came when anyone else was awake. Only when the house was still, when the clock passed 2 a.m., and I was the only one with my eyes open, listening for the sound that meant he was back. Sometimes I'd hear it faintly from the other side of the house, tapping on a different window, almost like he was searching for me, remembering which one I used to sleep behind. One night, I woke up because I dreamed I heard my name whispered from far away, and when I sat up, every motion light outside was already on. All of them. A trail of white stretching from the driveway across the yard toward the woods, like someone had walked the whole perimeter. I watched for almost an hour, but no one moved. The next morning, the lights were off again, but near the fence where the field began, the grass was pressed flat into a shape that looked like a person had been lying there, waiting. We moved that winter. My parents said it was because of my dad's job, but I think they were scared too. They never admitted it, but I caught my mom once, standing in my old room staring out the window, her hands shaking. She told me not to worry, that no one could find us now. Years later, after I was grown, I drove through that town again, out of nostalgia. The house looked smaller, almost friendly. The field was still there though, unchanged, wild, breathing. I parked across the street and sat there watching the wind move through the grass, half expecting to see someone step out from the edge of the trees. The sun went down faster than I realized, and for a second, just before I turned the car on, I saw a flicker, like the brief reflection of a flashlight beam catching the side of my windshield. Then nothing. That was 3 years ago. I live in a different state now, different climate, different everything. But sometimes, around 2:30 in the morning, I'll wake up for no reason. The air will be too still, too heavy, like the moment before a storm. And every time, without fail, I'll think I hear it again. 3 faint taps on the window, gentle and patient, like someone who already knows which side of the house I'm sleeping on this time. Story 6. The playground behind the church. There used to be a playground behind St. Mary's, back in the part of town where the old houses leaned into each other like gossiping neighbours. If you lived there any time in the early 2000s, you probably remember it. The one with the red slide that always shocked you with static, the crooked swing set that squealed like it was in pain, and the sandbox full of bottle caps instead of toys. It wasn't an official playground anymore by then, just something left over from when the church ran a Sunday school decades earlier. When I was a kid, we called it the back lot, and we weren't really supposed to go there after dark. But that never stopped us. It was the summer before middle school, the first time any of us were allowed to stay out past 9, and we treated every dusk like an adventure. There were 4 of us, me, Jamie, his sister Lacey, and our friend Morgan. We'd bring flashlights and snacks and dare each other to climb the rickety slide ladder or jump off the swing when it creaked the loudest. Most nights were nothing but mosquito bites and laughter. But one night, something different happened. Something we still can't quite explain, even now. It started with the sound. Not the usual chirping and wind and distant cars. This was sharper, more deliberate. A metallic tink, 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 like something small hitting the monkey bars over and over. We all froze when we heard it, our flashlights bouncing off rusted metal. Jamie whispered that maybe it was a raccoon, but it didn't sound like an animal. The rhythm was too even. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Lacey said, half joking, "It's Morse code." And that's when Morgan pointed his light toward the far edge of the playground, where the fence met the line of trees. There was someone standing there, tall, perfectly still, just outside the beam of light. We couldn't see their face, just the shape of their shoulders and the way one arm hung at their side while the other slowly lifted, holding something small and shiny. It caught the flashlight for a second, a glint of reflection. Then the sound started again. Tink, tink, tink. We didn't move. The figure lowered their arm and began to walk, but not toward us. They circled the playground, slow, careful steps that made no sound except when they brushed the fence. Every few seconds, they'd stop and tap that same object against the chain link, always 3 times. Tap, 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 like a warning or a pattern. I don't know why, but none of us ran. We just crouched by the swings, holding our breath, watching that shadow drift in a wide, deliberate loop until it disappeared behind the old slide. We waited a full minute before speaking. Morgan whispered, "We should go," and we all nodded at once. But as we turned, Lacey gasped. The figure was back, closer now, standing between us and the gate. I could see more this time. Long coat, pale hands, face hidden in shadow. The thing in its hand wasn't metal after all. It was a key ring. Dozens of keys, all different sizes, hanging from a loop that caught the light as it turned. It tilted its head toward us and shook the keys once, gently, and I swear to you, the sound didn't echo right. It was like hearing something through water. Then it lifted one key from the ring, held it up to its face, and spoke. Just one word. Soft, but clear enough for all of us to hear. Found. Jamie bolted first, and the rest of us followed. We didn't stop until we were halfway down the street, lungs burning, flashlights swinging wildly. When we looked back, the playground was empty, just the faint squeak of a swing moving in the wind. We didn't tell our parents. Who would believe 4 kids who'd been sneaking out at night? We just promised not to go back. And for a while, we didn't. But the next week, Jamie said he'd seen the same figure standing near the fence in daylight. Just standing there, facing the church, not moving. He tried to show us, but by the time we got there, it was gone. A few days later, Morgan found something in his mailbox, a small key tied with string. No note, no explanation. We thought maybe someone was pranking us, but when we compared it to the ones our parents had, it didn't fit anything. We laughed about it to hide how freaked out we were. By the end of that summer, we'd all started keeping our curtains closed at night. Sometimes I'd hear the sound in my sleep, that delicate metallic tapping, and wake to find the air in my room colder than it should have been. Once, I found a smudge of dirt on my window ledge, shaped like a long fingerprint. My mom thought it was from a bird. I didn't correct her. The last time any of us talked about it was on Halloween. We were walking home from trick-or-treating when we passed the church again. The playground was gone, just gone. The fence, the slide, the swings, all torn out. The ground covered in fresh dirt like it had been erased overnight. There was a single wooden post left near the center, and hanging from a nail on it was a ring of keys. None of us went closer. We didn't need to. The wind was already moving them, making that same sound we'd memorized. Tink, tink, tink. It's been almost 20 years since then. I live 3 states away now, work in an office, normal life, normal everything. But a few weeks ago, my neighbour left for vacation and asked me to feed her cat while she was gone. I went over the first night, unlocked her door with the spare key she'd given me, and right away, I noticed something on the counter. A small ring of keys. Not hers, too many, too old. One of them was bent, another rusted nearly through. I don't know why, but I touched them. They were cold, colder than they should have been. I put them in a drawer and tried to forget. But that night, right as I was drifting off, I heard it again, faint, rhythmic, just outside my window. Tink, tink, tink. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself I was too old for this. But when I looked in the morning, the window latch was open, and there was a small key lying on the floor beside my bed. A new one, different from the rest, heavier. with my initials scratched into it. Story 7. I inherited a map that redrew my house every night. I didn't know about the map when I signed the papers, only the smell of varnish and sun-hot dust, the way the key bit twice before it turned, and the little sigh the door gave like I had just interrupted something private. The house belonged to my great-uncle Martin, the one no one talked about except to say he'd loved jigsaw puzzles and walking after dark. He left me the place because I had sent him postcards from every city I visited during 5 distracted years chasing jobs that never settled. And he said, in a letter folded like a secret, that a home chooses who will have patience with it. I was flattered by the romance of that and ignored the warning tucked inside the compliment. The first day I slid furniture across the hardwood, I noticed the baseboards were nicked in places, as though someone had tried to pry the walls open with a knife. You learn to accept quirks in old houses. You learn to accept a lot, actually, when the rent becomes a mortgage and your name is the sound of the lock turning. The map was in the attic inside a cedar box that smelled like a drawer of winter sweaters. I hadn't gone up there for anything except to see if the rumors about trunks and moths were true, but the box had my name pressed into a brass tag, which had a way of making the rest of the afternoon about it. The map was made from something that didn't look like paper until it moved. Soft, fibrous, and slightly damp like the inside of an envelope that had spent a summer in the ocean. There were no street names, no compass rose, just a neat outline of my house from above, every room drawn with measured care. The staircase a precise set of teeth, the little square of the pantry tucked behind the kitchen like a held breath. When I smoothed the map on the floor, I felt a mild nausea I blamed on the dust. I left it there overnight because the attic window latched from the outside, and I was tired from hauling books, and there was no reason to make the attic neat when the rest of the house still had boxes labelled with jokey lies, like antique cannonballs and cursed teacups. The next morning, when I climbed back up with a mug of coffee and a sense of the day's chores, the map had changed. It was small. Maybe a closet shifted a few inches. The hallway kinked in a place it had been straight. The pantry fattened like a tick. I crouched over the map and told myself I had misremembered the exact shape because memory is a soft tool and yesterday was far away. But I don't misremember straight lines. I stared until the coffee cooled, then took measurements the way you measure a body for a suit and wrote in a notebook. Bedroom wall 12 feet, 4 inches. Hallway bend at 6 feet, 1 inch. Pantry depth, 3 feet, 10 inches. I went downstairs and measured the house to prove the map wrong. The hallway was longer by 2 inches than the plan in my head. The pantry was too deep by a hand's width. I had not moved walls in the night. I leaned my ear to the plaster and heard the sound you hear when a seashell pretends to be an ocean. But inside that was something that could have been breathing, or could have been my blood deciding to wear boots and pace. I decided to store the map in the dining room, where I would see it and not let it become some attic superstition. I cleared the table and weighted the corners with a blue bowl and a book of poems and the cedar box itself. Every night before sleep, I traced the floor plan with a fingertip like a prayer. On the 4th night, I woke to a draft and found the kitchen door open by an inch and the map swollen slightly in the middle, as if it were inhaling. I shut the door, checked the windows, came back, and stood at the table convinced I would not touch anything but the map beat me to it. The pantry, the quiet square by the kitchen, unfurled on the page like a tongue. Where there had been a wall was now a narrow passage leading into a room that did not exist in my house. I told myself this was moisture, a warping of fibres, and because I am proud in the wrong ways, I went to the kitchen with a tape measure as if I could refute an ocean with numbers. The pantry door resisted. Not locked, more like a polite hand against mine, the kind of human pressure you feel when someone wants to keep the moment private. When it opened, the pantry was deeper. I walked forward and the air changed temperature the way air does in an old church. A careful chill with a memory in it. I didn't sleep that night. I made a circle of light on the map and watched the house redraw itself with slow, respectful movements, almost shy, like it believed it needed my permission to exhale. Rooms stretched by inches, then sighed back. Corners softened. Twice, a doorway appeared where a wall had been, held for a breath, and vanished. If you have never watched a room practice becoming another room, you don't know the strange tenderness of wanting to encourage it, like coaxing a frightened animal to eat from your hand. At dawn, the house settled into the shape it wore for the morning, and I measured everything again because that's what I do when I'm scared. I make numbers. The numbers didn't help. So I did something I'm embarrassed to admit. I spoke to the walls. Not pretty words, just the simple conversation you offer a child who won't meet your eyes. I told the house I was listening. I told it I didn't plan to leave. I told it because I'd read somewhere that a place appreciates honesty, that I had no one else. If this is how you grieve, I said, I will give you the night to do it. The house liked that. Or maybe I liked hearing myself promise something fearless to a thing I couldn't understand. That evening, I brought a chair to the dining room and a blanket and sat with the map until it began its slow rehearsal. This time, I took notes, not measurements. Words like swelling and teasing and throat occurred to me, even though there was nothing biological on the table, except my hands. The map added a stair where there was no height to climb. A short run of steps leading into the outline of a room, snug under what would have been the second floor, if the second floor had existed. Each night, the phantom stairs returned. Each night, the phantom room shifted a little left or right, never choosing a place to be. By the 10th night, I began to dream during waking. My vision would tilt, and I would feel the carpet grow grain like wood, then scale like stone, and I would smell the sour cool of a basement I did not possess. The house was trying to remember itself, and the remembering leaked. My great-uncle Martin had kept a small library of things people write to avoid ending conversations. Local histories, small press poetry, pamphlets about mushrooms. What I was hoping to find was a letter, a scribbled set of rules, anything that would break this into commandments I could follow. I found, instead, an entry in a book about small-town engineering disasters. It mentioned a row of houses on my street that had been built over a creek that was paved and forgotten, the way a lie becomes a sidewalk if enough feet pass over it. There had been collapses and lawsuits. The city laid concrete like brutal frosting and planted trees to pretend it normal. I went outside and listened by the fence and heard water moving under the earth like sleep talk. When I came back in, I laid a glass of tap water on the map because it seemed polite to provide a drink to a thing that breathed. The map wrinkled around the glass as if it wanted to sip. I actually laughed, which is not the sanest response to topography flirting with hydration, but loneliness makes an audience out of anything. I'll tell you the night it turned. It was raining, the kind of rain that drenches the spaces you believed were sealed, and the power flickered in a way that confessed the wiring was older than I pretended. I sat with the map by candlelight, and the house hummed a soft, almost musical vibration into the soles of my feet. The phantom stairs sharpened, solid on the page. Their risers hatched in darker strokes than I had ever seen, and the room beneath them tightened its outline until it was a perfect square. A door appeared on the square's right side with a tiny knob. I could see that knob on the map as clearly as if someone had punched a hole there. When I lifted my head, I knew where it would be in the real house because I could feel a pull in that direction like a draft with fingers. I went to the kitchen, past the honest pantry, to the corner where the broom leaned and touched the wall. It was damp, but not from the rain. The dampness felt like the inside of a cheek. My thumb sank a little. The plaster did not crumble. It yielded. I pressed, and there was the smallest sound, like a cork giving up. A line opened, not a crack, a seam. It is important to me that you understand I was not brave in any cinematic way. I talked to myself, my voice small and cheerful the way people talk to dogs when neither is sure who should lead. I said, we're just going to look, and it's okay. And if this is a bad idea, we will back away like we never met. But the house had been so careful with me. I wanted to be careful with it. The seam widened just enough to take the blade of a butter knife. I slid metal into the skin of the wall and levered gently, and the seam became a grin. Behind the grin was darkness that smelled like not rot, not mold, something else, not absence, more like the air between two people about to tell each other the truth. I felt that, and I thought of my uncle walking after dark. I thought of him picking at the baseboards with a knife, not to destroy, but to coax. I set the knife down and placed my hand in the seam. It was cold, not the cold of winter, the cold of stone that has been left alone for a very long time. My fingers found the round metal of a knob that was not part of any room I owned. I turned it. The wall sighed open the way certain books sigh when they understand they are finally being read. The stairs were there on the other side, their wood a shade too dark for any era I knew, their treads shallow, asking for careful feet. I had the stupid thought that I should have brought the glass of water as an offering. I went down without a light, because it seemed cruel to greet an old room with a bright interrogation, and in the dark I could hear the house rearranging its weight above me, settling into a version of itself that made space for this. At the bottom, the floor was tile, not glossy bathroom squares, but little black hexagons stitched with white grout, the sort of floor that wants to be swept every morning by a broom that knows its job. My hands found walls that were confident, as if they had never doubted themselves. In the middle of the room was a table with edges softened by generations of elbows. I could tell it by the way it received my palms, like it was glad. I cannot defend what I did next. I sat in the chair that fit my height exactly, as if it had been measured for me while I slept, and I said my name aloud. The room said nothing back, but I felt the syllables return to me bent slightly, as if the room had tried them on and found them nearly right. I said my uncle's name, and the returning sound was the same kind of almost. When I said the name of the creek that ran underneath the street, Willowson, learned from the Brittle Book, the returning sound fit perfectly into itself like a jaw closing on a yawn. That was when I understood it. The house was practicing language, but not the kind that uses lips. It was remembering the names of things in the way a tree remembers wind. For a week I lived like that. Day upstairs with my lists and my honest job and my phone that pretended nothing was strange. Night downstairs in the room that held its breath when I entered, then breathed with me. I brought the map down and laid it on the table, and on that surface it behaved with a kind of serenity I can only call gratitude. The walls in the room didn't move. The stairs didn't change their mind. The house had made a decision. The room wanted me to do something, and when I say wanted, I don't mean with malice. Desire is not always a threat. Sometimes a place wants your attention like a weather pattern wants a field. On the 8th night, the table offered me a drawer. I say offered because I had not seen a drawer until my fingers slid over a seam and the seam yielded. Inside was a stack of papers in my uncle's hand, grids with numbers, dates without labels, and little shapes I knew as soon as I saw them because I had been watching them form. The pantry tongue, the phantom stair, the square room with the door on the right. At the bottom of the stack was a note. I do not have to dramatize it. It was already drama to me. It said, "Be kind to the parts of the house that remember they were river." I taped my doors after that, not because I was afraid of something entering, but because the house liked being chosen. The tape was bright blue painter's tape, absurd and cheerful, and every strip felt like a ribbon tied on a gift you intend to open slowly. The room listened when I worked. I read the numbers in my uncle's grids, and the room seemed to recognize the cadence, the way a dog tilts its head at a familiar melody. He had been measuring not to confine, but to accompany. The river under us told the house about moving in its sleep, and the house told the map, and the map told whoever listened. I realized then how hard it is to be a thing built to stay put while your insides carry a current. We call it settling when we own a place. Maybe what we mean is accepting that we will be rearranged without proof we will like the finished shape. The night I heard my name correctly for the first time, I cried. I was not sad. There is a kind of weeping you do when a vowel falls into its socket and the ache you had accepted as character turns out to be fixable. The room said my name as if it had always known it, but wanted me to feel the pleasure of recognition. I said, "Thank you," like you say it to a person who doesn't need thanks, but enjoys your manners. The map on the table smoothed flat as a held breath. The house above me went quiet, like a sleeping child releasing the worry it had been holding in its jaw. I went upstairs and the pantry was honest again, nothing more than its mortal width. The hallway was the length it had been when I moved in, the kind of normal you can measure with a cheap tape and a sharp pencil. I pressed my ear to the plaster and heard the creak under the street making promises to the storm drains. The blue tape on the doors was a little curled at the edges, the way little flags get tired. I suppose this is where someone expects me to say it ended, or worse, that it never did, and now the house eats people who don't compliment it. The actual truth is kinder and stranger. The room downstairs is always there now, and the stairs that enter it are a little different each week, the way a path changes when people choose it. The map still redraws itself at night, but only on weekends, like a man who allows himself the luxury of his hobby after a week of professional restraint. Sometimes the map adds a room that is a memory I didn't know I had. A porch with rain that smelled like my grandmother's stove. A narrow closet where a winter coat I had in college waits with the crumpled wrappers of a winter I thought was my personality. I do not chase those additions anymore. I sit with them like stories at the end of a dinner, and when they fade, I thank them for visiting. The tape on the doors I replace each month, and the act has become a liturgy that calms me for reasons I can't defend to anyone but the house. If you are listening because you like neat endings, I know I have not given you one. What I can offer is a rule that is not quite a rule. If a place you live begins to rearrange itself, ask whether it is afraid of forgetting. If it is, become its archivist. Make tea for its drafts. Put water on the table. Measure. Not because numbers can fix anything, but because they can comfort a worried architecture. And if a room appears that you once deserved and then dropped, sit in it until it tries your name on and decides it fits. I used to think a home was a box you fill with your favorite angles. It turns out to be a river with a roof. It turns out to be a patient animal that moves at a speed too slow for the eye, but perfect for the ear pressed to the wall. It turns out, most nights, to be kinder than I am, and to forgive me when I get the measurements wrong. And if you are wondering whether the house and I have an understanding, I can tell you this. When it rains now, the map doesn't swell with worry. It breathes, and I breathe with it, and we both wait for dawn, and almost nothing has to move to make room for us. And that's all for tonight. If you've made it this far, thanks for staying with me through the strange corners and quiet rooms and half-remembered places. It's funny how some stories fade the second you turn off the light, and others linger in the space between the walls. Maybe that's the real reason we tell them, to make sure they have somewhere to go when we're done holding them. If you're listening while you fall asleep, I hope your dreams are soft and stay exactly where you left them. If you're still awake, maybe let the quiet sit for a while. Notice how the room sounds when nothing else is speaking. Most of the time, that silence isn't empty. It's just waiting to be noticed. I'll be here again soon with more stories that don't like to stay forgotten. Until then, keep your lights low, your windows latched, and your mind open. Just not too open. Good night, friends. And if you hear a sound you can't explain, don't worry, it's probably nothing.